There are nights I pray to forget, but the desert never forgets. That is a truth I learned the hard way. And even now, years later, it still follows me like a cold shadow across the sand. My name is Daniel Yazzie, and before I tell you what happened out there, I need to say something for folks who found this story online. Before I start, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you've ever felt something watching you at night. I ask because that feeling is where my story began, long before I understood what it meant. I used to be a Navajo Tribal Police officer, stationed near Tallahatchie, Arizona. The land there is beautiful in a way that hurts, wide and open and old. The red rock mesas glow in the day and turn into dark giants at night. The wind moves like it has memories of its own. And the silence, especially after midnight, is deep enough that you can hear your own heartbeat arguing with itself. I love the work, even the rough parts, because it kept me close to home and close to stories that my grandparents told me. Stories about the land, about respect, and about places people should not wander alone. One of those places sits along a lonely stretch of highway the officers call the Devil's Zone. The name isn't written on any map, but everyone knows it. It's a patch of land where radios glitch, engines stall, and travelers report strange lights weaving through the sagebrush at night. Nobody stays there longer than they have to. Even officers who don't believe in anything supernatural avoid it unless the sergeant gives them no choice. I remember the night I got assigned to late patrol on Route 134, which cuts right through that stretch. My sergeant handed me the clipboard and said, "Your turn, Yazzie. Don't worry. It's quiet out there." But the way he said quiet made something small and uneasy curl inside my chest. A few other officers glanced at me, but looked away just as fast, like they didn't want to be caught thinking about that road. I shrugged it off, told myself it was just old superstition, and headed out after sundown. The night air was already turning sharp with cold. My patrol SUV hummed along the empty road as I passed the last cluster of houses. After that, it was nothing but miles of desert, the moon hanging above like a pale lantern. I kept the windows cracked to stay awake, letting in the smell of dust and juniper. For a while, everything seemed normal. I checked mile markers, logged my status, and kept an eye out for stranded drivers or loose livestock wandering onto the asphalt. But somewhere around mile marker 23, the air changed. It felt thicker, heavier, like the desert was drawing a deep breath. I reached for radio to check in with dispatch, just to break the strange quiet, when a sound bled to the static before I touched the button. It was faint, but sharp enough to stop my thoughts. It sounded like a woman crying, not yelling, not calling for help, just soft, broken sobs, tangled in the static like she had been crying for a long time. I froze, listening. The crying grew clearer, as if the woman were right next to the microphone, breathing against it. I grabbed the radio and said, "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. Do you copy?" The crying stopped instantly. Silence took its place, then a click. Dispatch came through calm as always. "Unit 4, we didn't transmit anything." "Say again." A cold shiver rolled over my shoulders. I told them I must have picked up interference and ended the call. But the truth was, interference doesn't sound like a human voice. And interference doesn't sound hurt. I kept driving, but the uneasy feeling sharpened. I checked my mirrors more than usual, half expecting someone to be sitting in the back seat, even though I knew it was empty. Not long after, my headlights flickered. The engine coughed once, then again, and the whole SUV lurched like something had pulled back on it. The radio crackled with different sound now, a slow, heavy breathing, too steady to be a glitch. I gripped the steering wheel harder and whispered a small prayer, without thinking. Then everything snapped back to normal. The headlights brightened, the engine steadied, and the breathing stopped like someone had let go of the radio. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat loud enough that it drowned out the hum of the tires on the road. I told myself I was tired, that night shifts sometimes played tricks on the mind. But the desert outside felt alive, as if it were leaning closer, waiting for me to make sense of what I had heard. I tried to shake it off and finish my patrol, but the silence didn't return to what it had been earlier. It felt weighted, stretched in over something unseen. Even the stars looked different, sharper somehow, like they were watching instead of shining. When I finally circled back toward the station, I kept glancing over my shoulder, sure that something was pacing me in the dark. That night should have been my warning. It should have told me to ask for a reassignment, or at least talk to someone who knew more about the land than I did. But I didn't. I clocked out, drove home, and convinced myself it was nothing. I can see now how foolish that was. Because that night was more than just strange sounds and a failing engine. It was an opening, a quiet invitation from something in the desert that had noticed me. And if I had been smarter or braver in a different way, I would have listened to my instincts and turned back for good. I didn't sleep much when I got home. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that soft crying again, drifting through my thoughts like it had followed me beyond patrol and into my own rooms. I lay awake listening to the wind press against the walls, trying to tell myself it was only nerves. But the sound would not leave me, and the longer I listened, the more I felt that something unseen had taken interest in me. Morning brought a little comfort, but not enough. I went through my routine, fed my dog, made coffee, and tried to act like the night before had not shaken me. Still, I kept pausing, noticing shadows where there should not have been any, noticing how quiet the house felt, like it was holding its breath. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, but the rest of me understood that fear can cling to a person the same way desert dust clings to boots. When I returned to the station, I expected someone to mention strange radio problems or maybe equipment failures along Route 134. But no one said anything. Their silence made me wonder if I had imagined everything. But deep down I knew I hadn't. I could still hear the woman's crying as clearly as if she stood behind me. I thought about telling my sergeant the truth, but pride stopped me. I did not want to be the officer who jumped at shadows or blamed ghosts for failing equipment. So I kept quiet, hoping the desert would forget me if I ignored whatever had reached out from the dark. But deserts have long memories, and ours remembers everything. Later that evening, I found my name on the patrol roster again, assigned to the same route. A hollow feeling settled in my chest. I told myself it was just another shift, but something in me knew better. The desert had opened a door the night before, and returning meant stepping through it, whether I wanted to or not. I tried to steady myself as I prepared for the next patrol, repeating that nothing strange had happened. Yet I felt watched. I felt chosen. And though I didn't understand why, I sensed that the real story was only beginning. Tonight, I drove out the next night with a tightness in my chest, the kind that comes from trying to convince yourself you're not afraid when you know you are. All day, I had replayed the strange things that happened on Route 134, but I kept forcing myself to think of logical answers. Maybe the radio had picked up weird signals from across the highway. Maybe the SUV's power problem came from old wiring or the cold night air or even sand in the engine. I told myself I was tired, worn down from too many late shifts. It was easier to believe that than to admit the desert had tried to speak to me. Still, even with all those excuses, the moment I turned onto the road, leading toward the boundary of tribal land, a chill settled over me. I tried to shake it off. I rolled my shoulders, turned up the radio, and told myself everything would be fine. That was what I needed to hear. Before reaching my patrol zone, I stopped at a small convenience store that sat alone near the edge of the land. It had been there for as long as I could remember. The sign above the door flickered weakly, and the windows were clouded with dust that never seemed to wash off. I stepped inside to grab coffee and maybe calm my nerves. The store smelled like old wood, dry bread, and something sweet that I couldn't name. The elderly clerk behind the counter looked up from a small television playing an old Western movie. He nodded at me the way locals do, familiar, quiet, respectful. But when I mentioned where I was heading, his expression changed. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look afraid. He just looked tired. Route 134 again. I said, trying to keep my tone light. His eyes dropped instantly. He didn't meet my gaze. Instead, he started wiping the counter with slow, shaky strokes. That place, he muttered. Too many stories. Too many things not meant for people. I tried to smile. I've heard some of the stories. Elders like to scare the younger ones. He shook his head. No, the desert doesn't scare people for fun. It takes more from some people than others. The way he said it made my skin prickle. I wanted to ask him more, but his face closed off. He turned back to the television and didn't speak again. I left with my coffee, feeling like I had stepped into a silence that didn't belong to me. By the time I reached the route, night had dropped fully over the desert. The moon was thin, barely bright enough to paint silver on the edges of the rocks. My headlights cut through the darkness, revealing only the winding road and the endless stretch of sand on either side. Nothing unusual at first. Nothing strange. I drove slowly, listening for anything out of place. After about 30 minutes, I noticed something off in the slope of the sand beside the road. At first, I thought it was an animal trail, maybe from a stray dog or a coyote. But when I pulled over and stepped out, the truth tightened my throat. Footprints. Bare footprints. Small ones, like a child had walked there. The prints were clean and sharp, untouched by wind. I crouched down and ran my fingers along the edges. They looked fresh, as if made minutes earlier, but they didn't start anywhere. They just began as if the child had been dropped from the sky, and they went on and on. I followed the path beside them with my light. The footprints continued across the sand for nearly a mile, running straight with no turns, no breaks. No sign of a parent or an adult or even an animal nearby. No drag marks. No other tracks. Just tiny bare feet pressing into the earth. The desert wind wasn't moving at all. Not a single grain of sand stirred. The air around me felt trapped, as if the night were holding its breath. Even the usual desert sounds, the insects, the distant animals, the whisper of brush, were gone. Everything was still. I began to walk along the prints, shining my flashlight ahead. Each step I took felt heavier than the last. My boots sank into sand, but the small footprints stayed neat and perfect. I kept expecting to hear someone call out in the dark, maybe a parent searching for a lost child. But the only sound was the crunch of my own steps. After some time, the prints just stopped. There wasn't a final step. No fading trail. No sign of a turn or stumble. The last footprint was clear, shaped into the sand like the child had just taken a calm, simple step, and then disappeared into thin air. My stomach twisted, and I felt a strange pressure in the air around me. I knelt to look closer. That was when I heard it. A faint humming drifted through the darkness. It was soft at first, barely more than a breath, but then it became clearer, forming a slow, delicate tune. A lullaby. The kind mothers sing to soothe a child. It didn't come from my radio. It didn't come from any direction I could point to. It just floated around me, like the desert itself was singing. My arms broke out in goosebumps. Sweat formed on my neck despite the dry night. I stood quickly, shining my flashlight around, but the beam caught only emptiness. Then the temperature dropped. Not gently, not gradually. It fell in one heavy wave, washing over me like ice water. My breath puffed white in front of me. The desert heat should never fall that fast, not out there in the open. I wrapped my arms around myself instinctively. The cold pressed against my skin, sinking deep, like invisible hands trying to hold me still. The lullaby faded. The cold did not. I forced myself to walk back toward the SUV. Each step felt wrong, as if the ground beneath me had changed. The silence followed me, pressing against my ears. When I reached the road, I saw something that made my heart drop. Footprints. Those same small, bare footprints circled my SUV. Once. A perfect ring. Then they stopped at the driver's side window, facing the glass, as if whoever made them had stood there watching me walk away. I swallowed hard. My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the area with my flashlight, half expecting to see a child standing nearby. But the desert was empty. Only the prints remained, frozen in the sand like a warning. I got into the SUV as calmly as I could, though my hand shook so hard I nearly dropped the keys. Once inside, I locked the doors even though I knew locks wouldn't matter against something that could appear and vanish at will. I sat there for a long moment, staring out at the footprints, trying to steady my breathing. When I finally pulled away, the headlight stretched across the sand, lighting up the empty land. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see someone following me, or something. But the road stayed empty, silent, too large and too dark. I told myself I imagined it. That lie kept me sane for one more night. I barely slept after finding those footprints. Even after I crawled into bed and shut my eyes, all I could see was the perfect circle around my SUV and the final print facing the driver's side window. It lingered in my mind like an unfinished sentence when I wasn't brave enough to read aloud. By morning, exhaustion clung to me, but so did something else. Something sharper, heavier, like the desert had pressed a weight onto my shoulders that only I could feel. Driving to the station, I kept checking the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see a child sitting in the back seat or standing on the road behind me. But nothing followed. The daylight made everything look normal again, which almost made me feel foolish for how terrified I had been. Almost. The moment I stepped into the station, though, that sense of normalcy dissolved. Conversations quieted. A few officers looked at me, then quickly turned away, pretending to read paperwork or type something important. Maybe it was my expression. Maybe they sensed the tension hanging off me. Or maybe they already knew something I didn't. I took a deep breath and walked toward the break room. 3 officers sat at the table, Jones, Littlefeather, and Ortiz. They nodded at me, polite but distant. I didn't bother dancing around the subject. Anybody ever have strange radio problems out on Route 134? I asked, keeping my tone even. The room went still. Jones set down his coffee. Littlefeather's jaw tightened. Ortiz looked at the wall behind me like the answer might be written there. No one spoke. I tried again. Or footprints. You ever see anything weird on night patrol out there? Still nothing. Just heavy silence and 3 pairs of eyes avoiding mine. Finally, Jones exhaled and muttered, "Ask about Officer Hale." That name dropped into the room like a stone. I'd heard it before, whispered once or twice by older officers during night shifts. But no one ever told the full story. They talked around it, not through it. I felt a cold ripple move down my spine. What about him? I asked quietly. Jones shook his head, stood, and left the room without answering. Ortiz followed a moment later. Only Littlefeather remained, staring at the table, tapping a slow rhythm with his fingers. He was the last officer assigned to repeated night patrols on Route 134. Littlefeather finally said, 8 years ago. What happened to him? Littlefeather looked at me then, and there was a fear in his eyes I'd never seen in him before. He never came back. My throat tightened. Disappeared? Yes. He paused, lowering his voice. He called in one last transmission before his radio went dead. A whisper. Dispatch recorded it, but we weren't supposed to talk about it. What did he say? Littlefeather stood slowly, grabbed his hat, and spoke without meeting my gaze. You want answers? Check the old records. And Daniel, he hesitated at the door. If I were you, I'd ask for reassignment. Tonight. Then he left, leaving the air colder than before. I turned toward the records room because I knew myself well enough to understand that warnings would not be enough. Fear never stopped me from wanting the truth. Maybe it should have, but it didn't. The records room was quiet, lit by a single overhead bulb that hummed softly. I dug through boxes and digital archives until I found Hale's case file. The folder was thin, too thin for a missing officer. Maybe things had been handled differently back then. Maybe people didn't want to write down everything they saw. According to the file, Hale had gone out on routine patrol. Clear weather. Normal radio check. No signs of distress until his final transmission. My pulse drummed as I played the audio recording. It was warped with static, the kind that grows teeth and crawls under your skin. But Hale's voice still broke through. She's crying, she's so cold. Then nothing. Just dead air, followed by dispatch asking him to repeat himself. But Hale never responded. I scrolled through the log. Dispatch had written, "No transmission sent from base at that time." The note sent a tremor of recognition through me. I'd heard the same denial when the crying came through my radio. The same pattern. The same impossible explanation. The file didn't say what happened next. It didn't need to. Hale was listed as missing, presumed dead. No remains. No clues. Only an officer swallowed by the desert. I sat there for several minutes, staring at the page. The station's walls felt too tight, the lights too dim. I needed air, answers, someone who had been closer to the situation than a faded report. So I drove. Hale's old partner, Ben Thomas, had retired years earlier and moved to a small house near the canyons. I remembered him only vaguely, quiet, steady, and good at reading people. As I approached his driveway, his house looked weathered, the wood sun-bleached, the porch sagging a little. 2 dogs rested near the steps, lifting their heads as my SUV pulled in. Ben opened the door before I even reached it. He looked older than I expected, not just in age but in spirit. His shoulders hunched forward, and his eyes seemed to carry something heavy, something that had lived inside him too long. "Ben," I asked softly. He nodded once. "You're Yazzie. Heard you joined the force." "I did. I came to ask about Officer Hale." His face changed instantly. Not surprise, just dread. Deep, aching dread. He tried to close the door, but I caught it gently. "Ben, please. I need to know. I think something's happening again." For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then he stepped back and let me in. His house was dim and cluttered with old papers, radio parts, and dusty photographs. A pot of coffee sat cold on the counter. The air smelled faintly of sage and dogs. Ben lowered himself into a chair and rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm them, though the room wasn't cold. "I shouldn't talk about this," he said. "People said I was crazy when I tried." "I'm not here to judge," I said. "I just want the truth." Ben stared at the floor. Hale was looking into disappearances, not official cases. People who wandered the desert and never came back. Some said they saw a woman walking alone at night. She never spoke, never ran, just walked. But when anyone got close, she vanished. A chill slid through me. "And Hale saw her?" Ben nodded slowly. "More than once." He said she seemed to be leading him somewhere. The last week before he disappeared, he didn't sleep much. He said he heard her crying through the radio, sometimes humming. My breath caught. "A lullaby?" Ben's eyes widened. "You've heard it, too." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Ben leaned forward, gripping the armrests. "Daniel, you need to stop patrolling that route. There's something out there that watches, that waits. And when it chooses someone, it doesn't let go. It wants a new voice to drag into the sand. Don't be that voice." His words struck me harder than I expected. I felt them settle somewhere deep, joining the fear already rooted inside me. I thanked him quietly and stepped outside. The dogs were standing now, staring toward the ridge behind the house. Their tails were tucked low, ears pinned back. A low growl vibrated in their throats. I followed their gaze, but the ridge held only shadows. Then I heard it, not faint this time, not drifting or distant. The lullaby, clear, slow, and heartbreakingly gentle, gliding down the ridge as if sung for me alone. I felt watched, seen, chosen. And though I wanted to run back to the SUV and drive until the desert was nothing but memory, I couldn't move. I stood trapped between fear and certainty. Because whatever was out there, it wasn't done with me yet. The lullaby from the ridge followed me long after I left Ben's house. Even in the safety of my SUV, even with the doors locked and the engine running, the sound clung to me like a cold mist. I kept glancing at the mirrors, expecting to see someone stand behind a vehicle or walking in the headlights. But the road stayed empty, the desert quiet, the shadows still. Only the melody lingered in my mind, drifting through my thoughts like a memory I didn't own. By the time I returned to the station, everyone else had gone home. I sat in the parking lot for nearly 10 minutes, staring at the dashboard, wondering whether I should tell the sergeant I was done with that route. Ben's warning repeated over and over. It wants a new voice to drag into the sand. I wasn't sure if he meant a spirit, a curse, or something else entirely, but I knew he believed it. And now, after everything I'd experienced, I wasn't sure I could dismiss his words anymore. But fear and pride make strange partners. One pushes you back, the other shoves you forward. And pride won that night. I told myself I wouldn't let a patch of desert bully me. I wouldn't let the fear of something unseen steal my nerve. So when my shift came the next evening, I quietly took the keys, nodded to the sergeant, and headed out toward Route 134 again. The moon hung low and wide, a pale coin pressed into the sky. The night felt heavier than usual, like the air had thickened, slowing everything it touched. I tried to distract myself with the usual routine, checking speeders, watching for animals, logging mileage, but the unease never left. It sat in my chest like an unwelcome passenger. About an hour into patrol, I saw something ahead on the right side of the road. Something white, standing motionless against the darkness. At first, I thought it was a road sign or a sheet caught on a fence. But as I got closer, my stomach tightened. It wasn't a sign. It wasn't a sheet. It was a woman. She stood completely still, facing the road but not looking at the oncoming headlights. She wore a thin white dress that looked too light for the cold desert night. Her long dark hair covered her face, hanging in tangled strands that didn't move even when the breeze swept across the ground. For a moment, it felt like I had driven into a dream, one of those half-awake nightmares where nothing makes sense but everything feels real. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I slowed to a crawl and eased the SUV onto the gravel shoulder. The headlights washed over her, but she didn't flinch, didn't look up, didn't react at all. The sight of her made the back of my neck prickle. I forced myself to breathe steadily as I reached for the loudspeaker. "Ma'am." My voice cracked slightly as it echoed across the empty road. "Do you need help?" No answer. She didn't move. She didn't turn. She didn't even sway. It was like she wasn't breathing. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Ma'am, this is Navajo Tribal Police. Are you injured?" Still nothing. Not a twitch, not a flinch. My instinct screamed at me to stay inside the SUV, but training pushed back. I'd handled lost hikers, stranded travelers, and confused elders before. Fear didn't give me an excuse to ignore someone who might need help. So I turned off the loudspeaker, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the cold. The desert air hit me immediately. Dry, sharp, thinner than usual. My boots crunched against the gravel. As I approached her, the silence deepened. My flashlight beam slid over her dress, her hair, her still form. Then I noticed her feet, bare, small, dust-covered. My breath caught. They were the same shape, the same size as the footprints I'd followed the night before. The same prints that circled my SUV and stopped at my window. A chill ran through me so quick and so deep that I felt lightheaded. "Ma'am," I whispered, though my voice barely carried in the silent air. "Can you hear me?" Her head tilted just slightly, like she had listened for something far away. A faint sound slipped from her lips, soft as a passing breeze. Too soft for me to understand. It wasn't crying. It wasn't speaking. It was more like a broken whisper, a word caught in her throat. I stepped closer. That was when she looked up. Her hair parted just enough for me to see her eyes. Dark, sunken, hollow with a kind of pain that made my heart lurch. It wasn't anger in those eyes. It wasn't rage. It was sorrow, deep and heavy, the kind that feels like it's pulling itself apart inside a person. The minute our eyes met, a wave of sadness washed over me so suddenly I lost my breath. It wasn't mine. It didn't belong to me. It pressed into my chest like someone else had poured their grief straight into my heart. She raised her hand and pointed behind me. Instinct took over. I turned around fast, shining my flashlight in every direction. Nothing. Only sand, brush, and the long stretch of road behind the SUV. "Ma'am," I said again, trying to steady my voice. "Is someone there? Are you looking for someone?" No answer. Only silence swallowing up the road. I turned back toward her, expecting to see her still pointing, still staring at me. But she was gone. Completely gone. No footsteps. No movement. No shadow. She had vanished in the few seconds my back was turned, as if she had never stood there at all. I rushed forward, shining my flashlight across the sand. I checked the shoulder, the brush, even the middle of the road. Nothing. The desert was empty again, calm and still. I knelt down and examined the ground where she had been standing. No prints. Not even one. The sand was smooth, undisturbed, untouched, as if the woman in the white dress had been a trick played by the night. A tight, cold pressure wrapped around my chest. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Logic had no place out here. Every explanation I tried to form crumbled instantly. People don't vanish without leaving prints. People don't stand perfectly still in a cold wind without moving a single strand of hair. And grief doesn't pass from one person to another like smoke. I forced myself back to the SUV. My hands shook as I opened the door. I slid inside, locked it out of habit, and sat gripping the steering wheel, waiting for my breathing to steady. That was when the radio flared to life. Static burst through the speakers, loud, jagged, violent, the kind that scratches into your thoughts and makes you wince. But beneath the static, something else took shape. A melody, slow, soft, familiar. The lullaby, the same one that drifted from nowhere when I found the footprints. The same one that slid down the ridge near Ben's house. But this time it was clearer, stronger, as if whoever sang it was sitting in the seat beside me, leaning close to the microphone. I shut my eyes. The fear was no longer a cold wave. It was a fire crawling under my skin. When the lullaby finally faded, leaving only the softness of the engine, I threw the SUV into gear and drove away. Fast. Faster than I should have. But I didn't care. I couldn't stay another second. As the road blurred past, I finally understood why officers quit after patrolling Route 134. Some things in the desert don't want to be seen. Others do. And the ones that do, they follow you. The drive back from Route 134 felt longer than usual, like the miles had stretched overnight. The woman in the white dress stayed on my mind the entire time. Her dark, sunken eyes, the sadness pressing into my chest, the way she pointed behind me before vanishing without a trace. I kept replaying it, asking myself whether she wanted something or whether she was warning me. By the time I reached the station and turned to my report, I already knew I wouldn't sleep that day. My nerves were too frayed, and the desert's weight still pressed against me. Instead of heading home, I drove toward an old neighborhood on the east side of town. There lived a man the officers all knew, someone who didn't work with the police but quietly helped us understand certain things when we didn't know where else to look. His name was Arlen Begay, and he carried more history in his eyes than in all the dusty books stacked in the station storage room. Whenever officers faced something they couldn't explain, they ended up at his door. I had only spoken to him once before, but after what I'd seen, I felt drawn there, like something inside me already knew he would have answers. The sun had barely begun to rise when I pulled into his driveway. His house was small, the wood faded, the roof patched with care. Smoke drifted from a small stovepipe, carrying the smell of cedar into the cool morning air. I walked up to the porch and knocked. A moment later, the door opened, and Arlen looked out with calm, tired eyes. He didn't ask why I was there. He just stepped aside and let me in, as if he had been expecting me. His living room was warm, filled with old photographs, woven rugs, and shelves stacked with jars of herbs. A small pot simmered on the stove, letting out a scent that soothed my nerves more than I expected. Arlen motioned for me to sit, then lowered himself into a chair across from me. "You look like someone who saw something he wished he hadn't," he said quietly. I swallowed hard. I saw a woman, out on Route 134, middle of the night. She didn't speak, didn't move when I called out. And when I turned my back for a second, she was gone. Arlen didn't react with surprise. Instead, he grew still, his expression tightening just slightly. "What did she look like?" he asked. "Thin," I said. "White dress, long hair, bare feet, dust everywhere. And her eyes." I paused, remembering the hollow sadness in them. She looked like she'd been grieving for a long time. Arlen stared at the floor for a long moment. "Did she say anything?" She whispered something, too soft to hear. "Did you feel anything?" he asked. "Yes," I answered immediately. Sadness, heavy sadness, like it didn't belong to me. He closed his eyes, and all the color seemed to drain from his face. When he opened them again, they looked older, darker, full of knowledge he wished he didn't hold. "I know who you saw," he said. My heart thudded. "Who?" Her name was Alana Nez. The room felt smaller instantly. She vanished 20 years ago, he said. A young mother. Her daughter disappeared first, somewhere near the same desert you patrol. Search teams looked for weeks. The little girl was never found. And Alana, she refused to leave. She searched day and night until something in her broke. One morning, she walked into the desert alone and never returned. A cold tremor moved through me. People assumed she died out there? Yes, Arlen said softly. But death doesn't always mean rest. Some emotions hold onto the land. Grief most of all. When someone loses everything, their pain can leave marks, deeper than footprints, deeper than wind. Sometimes it stays even when their body does not. I remembered the footprints on the sand, the lullaby humming from nowhere, the figure pointing behind me. A chill crept slowly up my spine. Are you saying her spirit is out there? I asked. Arlen didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. People started seeing a woman wandering the desert not long after she vanished. Always at night, always searching. When approached, she would vanish. Some said she cried for her daughter. Others said she was looking for someone who could hear her, someone who reminded her of the child she lost. Those words settled heavily in the space between us. Why would she appear to me? I asked quietly. Arlen studied me for a long moment, his gaze deep and thoughtful. You responded to a missing child case years ago, didn't you? A little girl from Gallup. I blinked. The memory rose slowly. Dusty roads, frantic parents, and a girl with long dark hair who clung to me when we found her. Yes, I said. She looked scared. I carried her back to the vehicle. Arlen nodded. She resembled Alana's daughter. Maybe enough for Alana's grief to sense it. Grief looks for echoes. It attaches itself to familiar shapes, sometimes to familiar hearts. The thought made my stomach twist. So, what does she want from me? To finish what she could not, Arlen said. To find what she could not find. Spirits like hers do not appear to just anyone. If she has chosen you, she will not let go until you see what she needs to show you. I felt a tightness in my chest, somewhere between fear and something heavier. Chosen? I repeated. I didn't ask for this. Few people ever do, Arlen said gently. The desert chooses for reasons we may not understand. You saw her. She saw you. That creates a bond. I leaned back, running a hand over my face. I don't know if I can do this. The things I've heard, the things I've seen. Something's not right out there. Something's dangerous. Arlen's voice softened. Grief is dangerous. It can reach across years. It can bend the edges of the world around it. But it is not always evil. Sometimes it is just lost. His words struck a place deep inside me. The memory of the woman's eyes surfaced again, dark, sunken, but pleading, not threatening. I don't know whether I feel bad for her or scared of her. I admit it. Both can be true, Arlen said. But understand this. Ignoring her will not make her leave you alone. Spirits that strong do not fade because we wish them to. Silence filled the room as I let his words settle. Outside, the morning light strengthened, casting warm lines through the windows. Finally, I exhaled slowly. If I go back to Route 134, if I look for answers, what if I find something I'm not ready for? Arlen gave a small, sad smile. Then you will face it, and you won't face it alone. I nodded, though fear still curled around my ribs. But beneath it, something else began to rise, resolve, maybe, or an understanding that whatever waited out there would not stop until I listened. I'll go back tonight, I said at last, not to run, to find out what she wants me to see. Arlen's gaze softened. Then be careful. The desert remembers everything. As I left his house and stepped into the bright morning air, the weight of the night ahead settled over me. The woman in white, the footprints, the lullaby, Alana Nez, all of it pointed back to Route 134. And I knew the desert wasn't finished with me yet. The sun dipped beneath the horizon as I drove toward Route 134 once more, the pale orange fading into a blue so dark it felt almost unreal. The conversation with Arlen stayed heavy in my mind. His words replayed again and again. If she has chosen you, she will not let go until you see what she needs to show you. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. With each mile, fear sat low in my stomach, but something else had rooted itself beside it. A strange pull, as if the desert itself were calling me back. I no longer felt like I was returning because of duty. I was returning because Alana wanted me to, because whatever she lost, whatever she searched for, was not finished with me yet. By the time I reached the stretch of road where I had seen her before, the night had fully settled. The moon hid behind thin clouds, casting a dim glow that barely lit the ridges. The silence was absolute. Even my SUV seemed reluctant to move, humming low as if whispering its own warning. Still, I parked on the shoulder and stepped out, letting the dry air brush against my skin. This time, instead of scanning the road nervously or gripping my flashlight like a lifeline, I simply stood still and listened to the desert breathe. Alana, I called out softly, my voice echoing into the empty terrain. Saying her name out loud felt strange, like stepping across an invisible line. If you're here, I'm listening. At first, nothing answered, just a quiet stretch of land and the slow settling of night. But then the temperature dipped, not sharply but gradually, enough that I could feel the cold crawling through the seams of my jacket. My breath fogged slightly as I exhaled. Dust lifted from the ground in a small arc, swirling in a slow, deliberate circle just a few feet in front of me. It wasn't a gust of wind. It wasn't random movement. The dust rose and spun like something unseen had stirred awake. My heartbeat quickened. I took a hesitant step forward. The dust circle widened, twisting into a soft spiral before drifting back down as if it had finished announcing something. I waited, staring into the shadows stretching across the landscape. Then I heard them. Footsteps. Not heavy, not rushed, not adult. These were light, almost delicate, like a child walking barefoot across the sand. The sound came from behind me, approaching slowly, each soft crunch making my skin tighten. I turned instantly, shining my flashlight toward the source. Nothing. No figure, no child, no movement. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled me, passing close enough that the hairs on my arms rose. Then silence, followed by a sound that made my chest ache. The lullaby, clear this time. No static, no distortion. A real melody drifting to night air, carried by a voice that sounded impossibly small and heartbreakingly sad. I recognized the tune immediately, though I had never heard it before that week. It was the same one from the radio, from the ridge behind Ben's house, from the place where the footprints vanished. Only now it was different, more intimate, closer, like it was being sung just for me. I turned slowly, scanning the desert. That was when I saw it. A faint figure stood near an old dry wash a few yards away, right at the edge of my flashlight's reach. It was small, child-sized, with soft outlines that flickered in and out of beam like smoke caught in light. The figure didn't move. It didn't step forward or back. It simply stood there, facing me, its presence light, but undeniable. My breath hitched. Every instinct told me to back away, to return to the SUV and drive as far from this place as I could. But something deeper held me in place. The lullaby faded, leaving a hollow quiet between us. The figure raised an arm and pointed downward toward the sand near the wash. I swallowed hard. "You want me to look?" I whispered. The figure didn't speak. But the air around me grew heavier, like the desert itself was waiting for me to move. I walked toward the spot it indicated, each step slower than the last. When I reached the edge of the wash, I knelt down. The sand here looked slightly disturbed, though not by wind. Something rested beneath the surface, half buried, its shape barely visible. I brushed away the top layer of sand with my hand. Something small and pale emerged. I dug deeper, my fingers trembling as grains fell away. A tiny fabric hair tie. Old, sun-bleached, fragile from years of exposure. My breath caught in my throat. The second I touched it, a rush of emotion surged through me, fear, sadness, guilt, flooding so suddenly it almost knocked me backward. None of it felt like mine. The grief was too large, too sharp, too much for a single heart to hold. It pressed into me with a force that made my vision blur. I clenched my fist around the hair tie, grounding myself. Slowly, painfully, the wave of emotion faded, leaving me shaking and breathless. When I looked up again, the child-sized figure was gone, but someone else stood in its place. On the ridge above the wash, illuminated faintly by the moonlight breaking through the clouds, stood the silhouette of the woman in the white dress. Her long hair drifted over her shoulders, though there was no wind to move it. She didn't approach. She didn't vanish. She simply watched me, still and silent, her form outlined against the sky. For a long moment, we remained frozen in place, the desert holding its breath between us. Then something shifted in her posture, a soft tilt of her head, a subtle lowering of her shoulders. It felt like a silent plea, one layer with years of longing and wounds the world had ignored. I stood slowly, the hair tied tucked gently in my hand. My voice came out rough and uneven, but it carried the truth I felt. "I'll help you." The words left me like an oath, binding and quiet. The silhouette on the ridge didn't move, but the air around me changed. The heaviness softened. The cold loosened. The desert no longer felt hostile, no longer like something hunting me. Instead, it felt like a place waiting for the story beneath its surface to finally be uncovered. The silhouette faded slowly, piece by piece, until only the ridge remained, empty and still. I stood there for several long breaths, letting the moment settle inside me like sand drifting to the ground. Clutching the hair tie, I walked back to the SUV. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel chased. I didn't feel dragged into something unwilling. I felt chosen for a reason I didn't yet understand. When I turned the key, the engine hummed to life gently, without flickering lights or static. The desert road stretched ahead of me, quiet and dark, but no longer threatening. Something had changed, and I knew the path forward would lead to answers I could no longer avoid. The hair tie felt impossibly small in my hand as I drove back toward town. Even after I washed the sand from my fingers, the fabric carried a weight I couldn't describe. It wasn't just an object. It was a story, a plea, and a memory buried beneath the desert for 20 long years. And now that I had found it, the desert felt different. Not lighter, not safer, just expectant. Like it knew I had stepped onto a path that couldn't be undone. I parked outside Arlen Begay's home just as the sun dipped below the ridgeline. The last orange streaks faded into blue as I walked up his porch. Before I could knock, the door opened. Arlen stood there, quiet and steady, though his eyes sharpened the second they landed on my face. "You found something," he said. I opened my palm and showed him the hair tie. His breath caught, not in shock, but in recognition so strong it seemed to echo through him. He took the small object gently, as if afraid it might crumble beneath his touch. "This belonged to her daughter," he whispered. "I remember from the photograph her family shared. She wore it almost every day." The room grew still. The shadows on the walls thickened, as if leaning closer to listen. "Alana showed me where it was," I said quietly. "Or her child did. I'm not sure." Arlen closed his eyes, absorbing the words with a heaviness that felt ancient. "If she guided you to this, then she trusts you now. Spirits lost in grief do not reveal their memories unless they believe someone can carry them." I swallowed hard. "So, what do I do?" "We go back," he said. "Tonight, before the desert changes its mind." He prepared quickly, gathering items with the careful rhythm of someone who had done this before. Prayer ties in red and blue, a small lantern, a pouch of corn pollen, and a blanket worn thin from years of use. When he handed me the lantern, his voice was soft but firm. "We go respectfully. These places hold stories older than ours." We walked gently. We drove in silence toward Route 134. The sky deepened to a cold, dark blue, and stars began to push through the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly in both directions, waiting. When we stepped out onto the shoulder of the road, the night felt different from the others, colder, more aware. Even the air seemed to listen as Arlen tucked a prayer tie into the crook of a creosote bush. "Show us what remains," he murmured. We walked toward the same dry wash where I had seen the childlike figure. I carried the lantern, its warm glow cutting a small circle through the darkness. The silence felt unnatural. Even the insects that usually clicked and chirped in the night were gone, as if they had fled before we arrived. Arlen noticed too. The desert makes room when it wants something seen, he said. A faint sound drifted across the sand. I stopped immediately, straining to hear. Soft crying. Not one voice, two. One small and trembling, the other older and full of a grief that cracked at the edges. The sound came and went like wind, yet the air remained completely still. My heart thudded as we followed the cries. A cold wind rose, sudden and sharp, brushing past us even though the rest of the night stayed motionless. It pushed sand across the ground in a long, thin trail, guiding us toward a rocky outcrop that jutted from the earth like a broken tooth. Arlen nodded. She wanted us to go there. We approached slowly. As we neared the rocks, the crying grew clearer. The small voice sobbed softly, and the older voice tried to soothe it with broken whispers. The pain in their voices reached inside my chest and pulled something tight. Then the sand shifted beneath our feet, not from wind, not from animals. It shifted as if unseen hands brushed aside, making a path between the rocks. Arlen gripped my arm lightly, urging caution. The lantern's glow spilled across the ground, revealing a narrow crevice partially hidden by brush and stone. The crying stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound. I knelt down and held the lantern closer. The light slipped into the crevice, illuminating what lay within. Small remains, wrapped in faded scraps of fabric. Time had worn them down, gently and mercilessly. But there was no mistaking what they belonged to. A child, a very small child. My throat tightened, and my eyes stung as the truth settled into my bones. Arlen lowered himself beside me and whispered prayer, his voice low and steady. The words weren't meant to explain. They were meant to honor, to comfort, to guide. As he prayed, a heavy sorrow pressed into my chest, not sudden, not violent, but steady and deep. It was the same weight I had felt when I touched the hair tie. Alana's sorrow. The sorrow of a mother searching for her child long after her own body had given up. I bowed my head, unable to steady my breathing. My vision blurred with tears I hadn't expected. The grief didn't hurt me. It moved through me, asking to be heard. Behind us, the sand shifted again. I turned slowly. A figure stood several yards away, rising from the shadows as if the night had shaped her from its own darkness. Alana, clearer than I had ever seen her. The white dress clung to her thin frame. Her hair lifted gently, though no wind blew. Her eyes, still sunken, still full of sorrow, were softer now, touched with something almost human. She stepped forward, her feet barely obeying gravity. She didn't come close enough to touch us, but she didn't vanish either. Her gaze drifted from me to the crevice, then back again. Understanding flickered within her hollow expression. I held up the lantern, offering its light, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she lifted her hand slowly, reaching toward the remains. Though her fingers passed through the air, the gesture held the weight of 20 years of searching. 20 years of calling for a child who could no longer answer. Something loosened inside the desert. The air warmed slightly. The crushing sorrow in my chest eased. Arlen finished his prayer, and the lantern flame flickered in response. Alana's outline brightened in the faint glow of the coming dawn. The sky behind her shifted from deep blue to pale gray. Her form began to waver, pieces of her dissolving into the morning. She looked at me one last time. There was no fear in her eyes now, no panic, only gratitude, quiet and fragile, the kind that settles in the heart and stays there. As the first edge of sunlight touched the ridge, her figure faded, dissolving like mist in the warming air. One moment she was there. The next she was gone. The desert exhaled. Arlen stood slowly, resting a hand on my shoulder. "She has found peace," he said softly, "and now the land can breathe again." I nodded, unable to speak. The hair tie felt heavier than ever in my pocket, but now it carried something different. Closure instead of despair. As we walked back toward the SUV, the desert felt changed. Not safer, not friendlier, but calmer, as if a long open wound had finally begun to close. But even with Alana at peace, I felt a new weight settle inside me. because in the quiet that followed her departure, a single question echoed through the early morning air. What would the desert show me next? The sun was already high when the authorities arrived at the rocky outcrop. Arlen and I stood to the side as they carefully collected the small remains from the crevice, speaking in low, respectful voices. I watched silently, the morning light turning the desert into a pale, glowing sea. It didn't feel like a crime scene. It felt like a wound finally being closed, one that had bled into the land for far too many years. When the medical examiner confirmed the age of the remains and matched the old fabric scraps to the Nez family photographs, everything fell into place. After 2 decades, the case was officially closed. Alana's daughter had finally been found, and her mother's spirit, after years of wandering, had been laid to rest. People at the station called it a miracle. Others called it closure. Some simply didn't know what to say. But everyone felt the weight of it. As for me, I felt relief, yes. But threaded through that relief was a strange emptiness, almost like something inside me had been scooped out and carried away on the desert wind. I couldn't explain it. Maybe helping Alana had taken something from me, or maybe the land had claimed a small part of my heart without asking permission. Either way, the feeling stayed. For days afterward, Route 134 felt different. Lighter. The usual dread officers felt about patrolling that stretch eased, though no one said it aloud. I avoided it at first. I told myself I needed a break, but the truth was that I didn't know how to return to a place where so much had happened, a place where I had seen the line between worlds stretch thin. At night, the dreams began, always the same. I stood at the boundary of Route 134, the desert stretching endlessly ahead. The stars shimmered above me, and the moon carved pale lines across the sand. And there she was, Alana, standing at the edge of the road. Not sad anymore, not hollow, just watching me with calm, quiet eyes, her white dress glowing faintly in the darkness. She didn't speak, and I never stepped toward her. We simply stood separated by the road, sharing a silence that felt full rather than empty. Each time I woke from the dream, I lay still for long minutes, wondering if it was just my mind replaying everything or if Alana's spirit still lingered somewhere in the desert, keeping watch. A part of me found comfort in the idea. Another part feared what it meant. Eventually, I went to see Arlen again. His house felt the same, warm, soft-smelling, familiar, as though no time had passed at all. He brewed tea while I explained the dreams, taking his time before answering. Emotional bonds don't always fade quickly, he said. Even when a spirit finds peace, the echoes remain. You walked a long path with her grief. That kind of connection leaves a mark. A mark on me? I asked. A mark on both of you, he said gently. She trusted you to finish what she could not. That trust doesn't vanish just because her journey has ended. I took a slow sip of tea. The warmth spread through my chest, easing some tension but deepening another. Do you think she's still out there? Not the way you saw her before, Arlen replied. But memories linger. Energy lingers. Sometimes we feel the presence of those who touched us, even after they've gone. It's not haunting. It's remembering. Remembering. The word settled into me like a pebble dropped into water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood. Maybe that was why I couldn't shake the sense that something inside me had shifted. Maybe the desert remembered me as much as I remembered it. As the days passed, I found myself considering something I had never expected, leaving the force. Not out of fear, not because of what I'd seen, but because the desert felt different now, full of echoes, full of eyes I couldn't unsee. I felt like someone who had walked through a doorway and couldn't go back to the person he was before crossing it. Every patrol felt heavier. Every night shift carried a different kind of silence. I didn't talk to anyone about it. Not my sergeant, not the other officers. It wasn't about the job. It was about me. Something inside me had been stretched thin, and I couldn't tell whether it would ever return to normal. Then, one evening, while off duty, sitting on my porch with the fading daylight settling around me, I heard it again, the lullaby, soft, distant, almost like a breeze humming past my ear. But this time it carried no grief, no fear, no plea. It was gentle, almost grateful, like a mother humming to calm a child. It drifted through the air for only a few seconds before fading entirely. I stood slowly. I didn't bother grabbing my jacket or my boots. I simply walked to my SUV, started the engine, and drove toward Route 134, the road stretching ahead like a familiar path etched into my bones. The desert was quiet when I arrived. Not eerie, not heavy, just quiet, the way a sleeping land rests after a long storm. I stepped onto the shoulder and walked to the exact place where I had first seen the footprints weaving across the sand. The air was cool, the sky washed with 1,000 stars. I felt the desert breathing around me. For a moment, I stood there, unsure what to say or what to do. Then the words came naturally, carried by something deeper than thought. You're not alone anymore. My voice drifted into the night, small but sincere. A warm breeze rose suddenly, brushing against my face and lifting the dust around my boots in a soft swirl. It felt like an answer, like a thank you, like the desert itself was finally letting go of something it had held too tightly for too long. For the first time in weeks, the heaviness inside me loosened. I felt myself breathe fully, without the weight of someone else's sorrow pressing down on my chest. I didn't know if the dreams would stop or the lullaby would return, but I finally understood that those things no longer needed to frighten me. They were reminders of a story that had finally found its ending. I walked back to the SUV and sat behind the wheel, letting the engine idle as I stared down the long stretch of road. When I glanced in the rear-view mirror, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A small shape, a smile, a light that didn't look like it came from the dashboard. I blinked, looked again. Nothing. Just the empty back seat, washed in moonlight. Maybe it was just the light. Maybe. But as I pulled away from Route 134, I couldn't help feeling that part of the desert's long memory was saying goodbye. Months passed after Alana's spirit finally faded with the rising sun. Life didn't return to normal, not exactly, but it settled into something quieter, something gentler. The department reassigned me to daytime patrols, partly at my request and partly, I think, because the sergeant saw something different in my eyes after everything that happened. I didn't argue. I felt like I'd given enough of myself to the night for one lifetime. Even so, I still drove near Tehachapi sometimes. Not on duty, just on my own time, letting the familiar roads unwind beneath me. I told myself it was habit, or maybe curiosity, but deep down I knew the truth. Part of me wanted to make sure the desert stayed calm. Part of me wanted to know whether Alana's presence lingered anywhere among the ridges and washes. And part of me, maybe the biggest part, just wasn't ready to let go of the connection we'd shared, strange as it was. I never saw her again. Not the white dress. Not the sunken eyes. Not the silhouette watching from the ridge. But sometimes, during long evening drives when the sun dipped low and the sky blazed red, I felt something in the air, a quiet presence, a gentle awareness. It never frightened me anymore. If anything, it felt protective, like someone walking a few steps behind me, making sure I stayed safe on the road. The officials called the case solved. They checked the boxes, closed the files, tied everything up in neat conclusions. They praised Arlen and thanked me for our persistence. They said the desert had given up its secret at last. Maybe they were right in their own way. But I still believe the desert solves things differently, not by handing over evidence or presenting answers plainly. It solves things the way it breathes, slowly, quietly, through signs and echoes only the patient hear. Some nights, when I couldn't sleep, I thought about the strange mix of fear and compassion that had guided me through the ordeal. I remembered the cold wind, the footprints, the lullaby drifting across empty sands. None of those things were meant to harm me. They were meant to be heard, to reveal a truth buried too long beneath grief. The supernatural had reached out not with claws but with trembling fingers, trying desperately to make someone understand. And somehow, that someone had been me. I kept thinking back to the night I first heard my name whispered across the radio. At the time, I thought it was a threat, something dark, pulling at me. Now, I'm not so sure. Maybe it was Alana's voice, faint and fractured, trying to guide me even then. Or maybe it was her daughter, desperate to lead someone to the place where she slept beneath the sand. I still don't know, but that whisper marked the beginning of everything, and sometimes when I remember it, a chill runs down my spine, not fear now, but recognition. I also thought a lot about Officer Hale, about the others who patrolled Route 134 before me. They didn't have the pieces I had. They didn't know Alana's story, didn't understand the grief that shaped the desert silence. Maybe she reached them too, but their fear kept them from seeing anything beyond the horror. I can't blame them. If I hadn't seen that childlike figure, if I hadn't talked to Arlen, I might have made the same mistake. Grief can look terrifying when you don't know where it comes from. It can swallow people whole before they ever realize they were being asked for help. Sometimes I imagine Hale hearing the same lullaby I did, but without context, just a broken melody drifting in the night, tugging at him. Maybe he tried to follow it. Maybe he got too close to something he didn't understand. If Alana was reaching for him, try to lead him to her daughter, he might have mistaken her plea for a threat. And fear has its own gravity. It pulls people into darkness faster than anything supernatural ever could. I don't think the desert chose me because I was braver or smarter. I think it chose me because of a moment years earlier that I barely remembered. The missing girl I carried back to safety. Maybe that memory lived inside me in a way I didn't realize. Maybe grief recognized something familiar in me. Spirits don't see us the way we see ourselves. They see the echoes we leave behind. They see the imprint of our choices, the patterns of our hearts. Sometimes spirits stay until someone listens. Arlen said that once, and the truth of it settles deeper into me each time I think about Alana. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want fear. She wanted someone to notice the path she had left behind. Someone to look where she could no longer walk. She wanted to rest. Now she finally can. A few weeks ago, I drove past the Devil's Zone at dawn. I didn't stop, didn't step onto the sand, didn't call out to anything. I just slowed the SUV and watched the desert stretch out in front of me, soft and quiet under the rising sun. For the first time, the emptiness didn't feel threatening. It felt peaceful. Still, a question lingered in my mind, one I hadn't asked aloud and probably never would. Was I chosen because I cared or because I feared? Did the desert sense compassion in me, or did it sense weakness? Maybe the answer is both. Maybe fear and empathy live closer together than we'd like to admit. Maybe they shape the same doorway in the heart. As I drove onward, leaving the Devil's Zone behind me, I felt the desert watching, not with eyes, not with malice, but with memory. The ridges and washes glowed faintly in the morning light, like pages in a story too old to read but too powerful to forget. And I realized something simple, something unsettling, something true. Maybe the desert remembers us too. Maybe it keeps pieces of our stories forever.